Welcome to The Problem, a Lockwood & Co. podcast. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Alan.
All right, so this week we're reading part 2, which is titled Before, chapters 5 through 8.
Yeah. In chapter 5, Lucy recalls how she first learned about the problem, joined an agency in her hometown, and why she ran away to London. I can't say agency.
We've all got random words that don't work for us.
I feel like there's a difference between like, I have agency in this situation and there is an agency that deals with this problem. I feel like those should sound different, I think, is the problem.
Chapter 5, we start off with like some history.
Yeah, so this is a big time jump. We jumped out of a burning building and now we're in Lucy's childhood.
Yes. I like the chapter art on chapter 5. It's like creepy ghost in a marshy, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very surreal. Like It's all silhouettes.
I like it.
It's cool. Spooky.
Before we get like the history of the problem, we get this story about Pliny.
We like jump way back in time.
And so I love this because my entire, like my personal relationship with the historical character of Pliny is all from the medical podcast Sawbones, where they pretty much just talk about how wrong he was.
Oh, yeah. The Greeks were doing their best, man. What do you want?
Oh, you know what? They do say that also, that like when we didn't know, we just tried everything.
Yeah.
You know? So
and he wrote it down, so like it helped to be like, this is what people tried,
But no, if anybody wants a good chuckle about serious medical problems, I recommend Sawbones.
This is also back when, like, in ancient Greece, I think the idea was that if you're a smart person, if you're an expert, then you know about everything, right?
Yeah.
Like you would know about biology and astronomy and mathematics. You'd be like a total stone cold expert. And we just don't believe that that's a good way to do things anymore. So, but this is a real, like, I went and looked it up. I was pretty sure the first time that I listened to it that this is like a real thing from Pliny. And it is, and it's pretty much what she says it is. What I like about it is how, like Pliny's whole story is pretty much what you would think of if you're like, somebody starts talking about a ghost. You're like, I know what ghosts are. They're like an apparition that, just appears to a person and it may or may not talk. It's not very dangerous. It's just like a vision that you're having. And this like takes that archetype, and then Lucy's like, I don't buy it, and here's why, because this is what ghosts really are, and kind of like recalibrates for the story how ghosts work and how they're actually dangerous.
I do like how it, goes into that storytelling and world building, but also I like how it implies that ghosts were always real, but something happened 50 years ago that really fucked everything up.
I like that too. It taps into a kind of trope of, and when I say trope, a lot of people mean, like, oh, this is a bad thing. I don't mean that. A trope of like urban fantasy where there's like, elves and all of that kind of stuff. Regular people are like, well, that's not real. But then in the urban fantasy, we know as the readers that like all that stuff is real. And there's like an underbelly to the world where it all exists. And this is kind of like, hey, yeah, all that supernatural stuff that people said wasn't real for so long really is real. We just don't understand it completely.
So along the lines of what you said with Lucy saying that she doesn't buy it because of ghost touch and blah, 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 blah. If we were to take the Pliny story as truth and that, it's just that something happened 50 years ago that messed everything up in a big way, is ghost touch a symptom of this new pandemic of ghosts? Like previously did ghosts not do that?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, this is like a new wrinkle. That why Ruby doesn't.
Do you mean
that's
Lucy?
Not right. It's Lucy.
We're not even talking about the show.
I know. She's in my head for the character though. I do definitely see Ruby Stokes when I visualize this. So when Lucy is like, I don't buy this, the information is wrong. What it really is that there was a change at some point.
That's it. It's something to think about because I don't think it's ever addressed in the books whether or not, like, I don't think we come back to that point, but I could see it happen. I could see it being a thing with what we learn about the problem.
Yeah, I really like that.
Or just maybe the ghosts before didn't feel a need to touch people. Like that sounded whatever. Like maybe they were all type 1s, you know, just floating around. But there's something about what's happening now that makes the ghosts angry.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a difference.
Yeah.
Now. And it's an aspect to ghosts that is unique to Stroud. And so like I always so I have like all my own personal like trying to figure out stories and like nomenclature around this stuff. I think of this as like the Hobbit effect is what I think of it as, because in Tolkien he's like there's elves and dwarves and orcs and like all that stuff comes from well-established mythology. And then he's like, but you've probably never heard of hobbits, and hobbits are blah 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 blah, because that's like his thing, right? And there's like an almost like self-conscious like, sorry about my thing, but let me explain it to you. And this is like the Hobbit effect for Stroud, where he's like, my ghosts work this way.
Yeah. So
it's really, yeah.
Just to sum up, it's good writing on 2 levels. It's interesting kind of summing up all the world building that we got spread out across the first couple chapters. And then also just interesting to think about, why is this happening? What's going on here? Yeah.
And it's also, we talked about this in the show. I think it's really strong for drama reasons to have ghosts that are like very dangerous.
Yes.
And we'll get more because, you know, like we knew that they were dangerous when they were in the haunted house, but it's not very explicit. Like everything runs by really, really fast. And I think this slowing down and going back in time does a really good job of going back over the rules, like you said, in a really methodical way so they get imprinted on us.
And it's so interesting, and we're going to get it a couple times in these chapters, how all the danger is couched in humor.
Yeah.
So it never, like, it's like, oh yeah, it's super dangerous, but you never really feel like anybody's in danger.
Yeah. It's really hard to pull off, I think. I didn't like this, I gotta admit, the first time that I read it, because I so enjoyed the very first lines where she's like, I'm not going to tell you about how things started out. We're just going to jump into it. And I was like, oh, cool. And then it like did this big time jump. And I was like, oh, don't do this. Don't. But then after a little while, I have to admit that I was like sucked into it and just forgot that they jumped out of a burning house.
Yeah.
And I think some of the best moments in the book happen in this section. Like when I think about this book, there are moments in this part 2 that are the moments I think about.
For the show, like episode 1 is still my favorite. Like it has none of my favorite moments in it, but just as a whole, it is my favorite whole episode. And I love how through this flashback, and I do think the show does it a little better because you get to know all of her friends or some of her friends. And like, you know, you really get to feel Lucy you get to feel Lucy in the book too here in this flashback, but you really get invested in her story in it. And I think I just think that that's really good. And I like it.
It's crazy how they stuffed part 1 and part 2 in one episode.
Yeah.
And did it so like strong. Yeah, it's really good.
I will say that in the history lesson here, we do actually mention Kent again, about how the problem seemed to have started up in Kent and Sussex, which we just mentioned last week about how does this come up again? I don't know. And then it kind of did. So, And we also get our first mention, not our first mention of them, but our first sort of concrete information about Fitz and Rotwell, where Lucy is thinking, or says, or I don't know, it's her narration. She says, at last, 2 young researchers, Tom Rotwell and Marissa Fitz, managed to trace each haunting to its respective source, blah, 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 blah. And they sort of started the ghost hunting.
Yeah, it was like there was a big crisis. People didn't understand how to deal with it. And they systematically laid out that source hunting procedure that we talked about last time. It's like a really important step in the world to making everybody feel safe, I think.
The first time that I read, the only time that I've read The Empty Grave, I thought that, which is the final book in the series, that everything that is sort of revealed about Penelope Fitz and her family kind of came out of nowhere, or parts of it kind of came out of nowhere. So I personally, during our reread project here, just wanted to really pay attention to anything that happens with Marissa Fitz.
When they're mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, just because I want to see if I just wasn't paying attention, which is highly possible. I sometimes don't.
I think it's really hard to write serialized fiction too. And there's whenever I'm analyzing a book, I try to analyze it on its own. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do what you're doing, but I always try to analyze it as its own thing, almost disconnected, even if it's a series, because it's so hard, I think, to write a book and for it to be coherent. And if you hook it up to a series too much, it ends up being like, it doesn't even feel like a book, if that makes sense. It just feels like one hanging part. It can be really disappointing to read in a series. I'm thinking specifically of like some of the mid Wheel of Time books, and like I would read those and be like, nothing happened in this book, and it's like 1,000 pages long or something like that. And it's like, because it doesn't have like a beginning, middle, and end of itself. It's just like picks up where the last one left off and then ends.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I wasn't necessarily saying it was bad. I really enjoyed how that all played out, character wise, and like parallels between Lucy and sort of who ends up being at the final kind of showdown, as it were. That was great. So smart. I just mean, I didn't notice if it was set up at all, and I wanted to see if it was. So
yeah, it's totally fair.
Wasn't a criticism. Or if it was of my reading comprehension. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying. Like
writing a series of books is hard, and sometimes
it's hard.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fair. So after talking about the start of the agencies, Lucy does have this line that, I don't know, it made me think of Alan, where she says, "None of this actually solved the problem, of course."
Yeah.
So, and it just makes me think of how you always bring up, or I guess both of us do, about how fucked this whole system is.
Yeah, it's just a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I put down here, I highlighted where she says, and because of extreme psychic sensitivity is almost exclusively found in the very young, this meant that whole generations of children like me found themselves becoming part of the front line. And it was like, ugh. Terrible.
See, I highlighted that because it says almost exclusively found in the very young. And I'm like, that doesn't say it's not in adults.
Yeah, and they say sometimes that like adults who had psychic ability when they were children can still like, they can not see, but like kind of sense like, oh, there's something over there. There's something going on. It's just like duller for them or something like that.
I wish we got more information about like exactly what age you are when you start to lose your talents, or in a range, because I'm sure it's different for different people. Because even mentioning Tom Rotwell and Marissa Fitz, they call them young researchers, which would suggest that they're like college age.
Yeah. You don't get the sense that like the nation rallied to a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old or something like that, and like they solved their problem. That doesn't feel like what happened. Yeah, but I really like that part because it's such a good summary of like all of this stuff is a good summary of the alternate history in the world.
Yes.
And like how the world came to accept, or at least, England came to accept this like widespread exploitation of children. And they were like, this is just how it is, like what choice do we have?
Yeah, I do wonder. Like, it doesn't matter to the story at all, but just because I love world building, like I love good world building, I would really love to see what ghost hunting or whatever is like in other countries, like what the volume of ghosts are.
I know, I think about this all the time.
Do they have the same like agency, like children and supervisor setups? Do they have their own DPRAC? What is that? I want to know. I want it, but the books are done.
And
they
just don't care about that.
Yeah, the kids don't care, so we, the readers, don't get to know. That's fine.
Yeah.
Moving on. This is actually, as an adult who reads quite a bit of young adult and middle grade fiction, sometimes when I read middle grade books, when the world building is so good, I'm like, can I tell this author to write adults in this world?
Right. Yeah.
Because I want it. I want to go deeper.
It's funny because I think this is like a trope of children's fiction that's really necessary. Like, how do you tell a story about kids where the adults just aren't constantly like getting in the way and interfering, right? And so it always requires this like really big world building element that takes the world of adults and children and like bifurcates them in some way. So like in the Narnia books, they're like literally in a different world, right?
Yeah.
But then in this case, there's just like some kind of weird age thing where kids have powers and adults don't. And so like that's how it works for the purposes of, you know, on the plot level, so that these kids can have agency in the story and like can do things that adults can't, so that they can get into trouble and have an adventure. But it's like, that's super interesting. Like, what is it to be an adult after you've had these powers and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like, how do you feel as a legislature who's, you know, a person who has to vote and say like more kids should die this week, you know, because like we need this thing done?
I mean, I think the politicians are fine with it if they're anything like our real world politicians.
Yes.
They are fine with it as long as they get money.
Yeah.
As
long as their kids aren't the ones on the front line.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that they have like a ceremonial. This is getting dark. Let's move on. So then we get sort of, I wrote down about Lucy's childhood here, that Lucy's childhood in the book is somehow better than what they showed us in the show, but it is still very terrible.
Yeah. She's more cheerful, it seems like, here in the book, about going into the whole thing. She's like, this is cool.
Yeah.
And I do all these things, like I'm learning new stuff. I like, you know, I'm taking care of the salt and magnesium and all of that stuff. And not like, I'm separated from my family, I feel unsafe, I'm unhappy. None of that angst is in here that was in the show.
Yes, but there is still like, you know, her mom took her to Jacobs when she was 8, and I still picture that scene from the show with an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of her saying yes to all those dangerous things, and where's the money going? My bank account, bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, I want her mom dead.
It seems in the book too that she is the only one who's able to do this. And you can understand how, I'm not making an excuse, but you can understand how with 7 kids and the husband's dead, that she's like, extra income. Absolutely. Like, you're going to feed and clothe her and I get money. Like, great. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense to me in a terrible way. That's like kind of how the foster system works sometimes too, where the kids will be taken away from the adults and they're like, great. Because I can't take care of them anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying she doesn't make sense as a character. I'm saying I hate her as a character.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I also just, we don't have to talk about, but I do like Lucy's first sort of ghost encounter with her sister.
Oh yeah, that's super cool. And how it shows how the problem is not just in Kent and Sussex and London, like it's everywhere, because she lives up in the north of England.
Yes, that's true. And I like her relationship with her sister, which in a way I actually think the show deciding to cut the sisters was better, just to isolate Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I just like that scene.
It speaks to like something deep in her character too, where she's like able to have courage for the ghost and to protect somebody else. It's like she's almost, you know, like she's a ghost hunter right there.
Yeah, she even kind of says that, but I was a plucky little girl, small and dauntless.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, all right, be a little full of yourself, but
she's not wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, I love Lucy. I could talk about Lucy forever. So let's move on.
Yeah, I like how she doesn't, I don't like this, but like I like how unself-conscious she is about like all the traumatic things and how she doesn't go to school, and she like thinks that she doesn't have like a reflection of like, this was bad for me.
Yeah.
She doesn't go to school. She doesn't learn anything. She's just exploited for her talents, and how all of that like feels good because she feels useful and special. And you can see how kids are like sucked into this system. Like, it's dark only if you have the awareness of the darkness. Like, this wouldn't feel too dark for a kid, I guess.
Yes, it's good writing because Lucy feels happy and fulfilled where she is. So, like, if a 10-year-old is reading this book, they're unless they're really reading between, like, I don't want to disparage the reading comprehension of a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think it's going to give them nightmares about how they're going to be exploited for the rest of their lives and just be a cog in the machine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you can see it. It's
Yeah.
there to.
Yes, but it's there if you're,
if you have the sophistication. There is like a little dark note just dropped in the middle of all this where she's talking about her team and stuff. And she says, like, their names, if you're interested, were Paul, Nori, Julie, Steph, and Alfie Joe. They're all dead now. And then it just keeps going.
I'd completely forgotten that the names were in the book. I thought Nori was just,
I think because the way
creation.
That it's dropped.
Yeah.
You know?
I'd forgotten about that. So that was nice. Not nice because they are indeed all dead now, but
Yeah. But that's just a part of the whole, I mean, like, that is just like learning how to, mix the salt and magnesium and all that stuff. Like, oh yeah, they're all dead. Like,
yeah,
it's just the thing.
And then we learn about Jacobs a bit and how he kind of went from, what seems like a decent supervisor, but then was like ostracized by the town, even though also kind of like seen on a pedestal, which I guess is also ostracizing, and how he slowly just got more and more scared, which it's kind of a shame they didn't have time for that in the show, because that's like an interesting character arc, that he was this really good agent, but then he lost his talents and couldn't hack it anymore.
I like how Lucy internalizes that change in his character too, that there's something about him that he loses his nerve and his courage. And this comes back in other chapters in this section. And so she like sees any emotion or like move towards intuition on her part as connected to that lack of courage in him.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that she's like internalized his falling apart is somehow like he was too emotional. I need to be more stoic. I need to be more in control because I'll just give in to the fear. And it's like she took kind of the wrong lesson, I guess is what I'm saying, from him.
Lucy is always like this, I don't know, ball of contradictions, because she does think that and will say that on the, not say, but in the narration. God, that's complicated. Or I'm making it complicated. She will say things like that, but then she's always advocating to try to talk to the ghost to get to the emotions.
Yeah, I think in this first book especially, this is the arc for her. That she starts out like, this is bad, and then she like learns that actually like this might be the best thing to do.
Yeah. Anyways, so then everybody dies.
Right, everyone's dead.
The thing, okay, I have this one random thing that is like, I don't know why, but if I got to ask Joe Cornish one question, this is the question I would ask him. And that's, why did you change the name of the mill? Because in the book, it's Withburn Mill, and in the show, it's like Morgram or something like that. I don't even remember.
Wow.
And it's such an insignificant change that doesn't matter at all. And I can't, so why did they change it? Like, the answer doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything, but they still took that step.
I wonder if one's real or something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I need an answer. It
That's funny that that's what you would ask him. You're like, we have to get to the bottom of this.
So something that is different in the book that makes me like really sad for Lucy, well, amongst everything else that we've been talking about, is that she's kind of like locked in the mill with her friends who are dead or dying, and has to find her own way out through a window.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah,
that's
I forgot about
terrible.
That. Yeah, she like climbs out the top or something like that.
Yeah, and then probably jumps down because I guess, may as well start how you mean to go on.
That's right. I'm thinking of how that's also the opposite of what happens later, where they come from underneath to get out too. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. But yeah, she says like a wind came along and knocked her off her feet and shut the door, and the walls shook, and then she was just stuck in the darkness and had to get herself out as she ran towards the screams.
It's really terrible. There's a really visually evocative thing too that they didn't do in the show, that when I read it here, I was like, oh, maybe it's a missed opportunity, but maybe there's other reasons why they didn't. But it says, I twisted my head looked back down the passage and across the foyer towards the open door. Far off in the distant dusk, I saw a cigarette's pinprick point of red, as like he's just standing there watching it all happen. But the only thing that you can see is like the cigarette. Yeah.
Most kids' TV shows don't like to have smoking. So
that's what I thought too. Yeah.
I just wrote down, like, we've been talking about this a lot actually, but just Jonathan Stroud's ability to write these truly dark shit, but keep it kind of light and adventure-y.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I think I forgot to say this last time, but there's, or if I did, we'll just edit it out. But I think there's like this whole thing about, to me, like humor is in a book is like, whenever I come across it, I'm like, oh, this is life. This is like, I think it's so important for an author to include humor in their drama, because it's like drama just gets so closed off and dead and feels unreal after a while. It just feels so constructed and fake after a while if there's no humor at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it really like opens things up and makes it more lively when things are funny. That's like what real people do. And real people, like when shit gets dark and things get hard, they make jokes about it. Like that's how we cope.
Yeah.
And so I just really appreciate the ability to do that in the fiction, and it's so important. And I think it's like, just as a theme, to put that life and death right next to each other is also like what these kids' lives are and stuff. So I just really appreciate it.
I'm just trying to see, like, it says that she's 8 when she goes to Jacobs, but do we know how many years? Like, do we know how old Lucy is?
Yeah, she talks about getting her level 2 and then
3, but
level 3, but I get no sense of like her age as that happens. I feel like it's years in between.
Yeah, I think of her as being 14 at the beginning of this book.
Yeah, 13 or 14 when at the end of this chapter, she goes to London, and I don't feel like she's like 10 or 11 or something.
No. And throughout the 5 books, about 2-ish years pass, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So that would put her as 16 at the end, and that feels about right to me.
Ugh, so young. Like, I have 2 teenage girls, and I just can't even imagine. They're like, I'm going off to the big city because you're terrible. Like, oh my God, what a nightmare.
Well, I assume you haven't, that they've had less trauma in their childhood. And unfortunately, trauma makes people grow up faster than they should.
I hope so. I don't know.
Right. Not to give you the benefit of the doubt or anything, but I assume you haven't been beating your kids or sending them into life and death situation.
No, not, well, sometimes. If I'm scared to go, then I send them, but
right.
Otherwise.
Chapter 6. Lucy interviews to become an assistant with Lockwood & Co. and is hired on the spot. Oh, I hate that she's an assistant.
Yeah, that is what it says, though.
Yeah, no, you're right. Although, to be fair, they don't ever treat her like one.
Yeah, I don't even know what it means. Is it like she's supposed to take notes and stuff, or they're just like,
I think of it as more like an assistant agent, like a junior agent. Because, in book 3, when they hire like an actual assistant, they don't have a note about her being, under 15. Because, which is such an odd, this whole thing, like well-dressed, preferably female, and not above 15 years in age. And then like apply in writing with a photograph.
With a photograph.
Why?
Yeah, maybe it's easier to tell, like, people lie about their age and be like, I'm 14, and then you're like,
okay, you know what, that's
19.
fair. That's fair. It's not that Lockwood and George have a collection of photographs of teenage girls.
I really hope not.
Like, what do they do with the photographs afterwards? I hope they just chuck them. Anyways, the chapter art is, of course, Skull.
Oh yeah, in the ghost lamp.
Yeah, and jar.
I know. There's a good picture of the logo of the company there too.
Yes.
That I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Whenever I see a picture, like an accurate picture of the skull jar, which is just a jar with a skull sitting at the bottom, I think it was Jonathan Stroud who tweeted one time, who was saying like, or maybe he said it in an interview. Shit, I should have looked this up. Anyways, he said something like, I do always picture the skull floating in the jar. Which is how most people draw a skull. But it is just sitting, like, the skull is not anti-gravity.
No. I think it even at one point in the book says that the skull is bolted to the bottom of the jar.
Oh, yeah, maybe. So it's interesting how people draw that. Like the face can be floating in the ectoplasm or whatever the heck.
Right.
But the skull itself is always sitting at the bottom.
I think that in the show, it looks as good as you could possibly do it.
Yeah.
It is funny. It is a funny idea, though, that like you could turn the jar around the way that it is in the show and be like, now it can't see us. But of course, like the face could just like go around it. I don't know.
Yeah. I love in the books how they're always just like, throw a tea towel over him.
Yeah, I know. Even here, he has a polka dot towel over him. Yeah.
Aw, skull. So Lucy then lists a bunch of agency, like Lucy's arriving at 35 Portland Row. And just before she walks in, she lists all the agencies that turned her down. And she didn't even try at Fitz.
I know. I noticed that she didn't try Fitz or Rotwell. She's just
no,
like,
she did try
no point.
Rotwell. She did.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
But not
Fitz. Yeah,
Fitz.
she didn't even try Fitz. Yeah.
I would assume that she went to Rotwell first and they said no. And then she was like, okay, so let's not even bother with Fitz then. We'll try the smaller places.
Looking for a job is really hard.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
I hate my current job, but that's fine. I'd rather that than looking for a new one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's part of the nightmare of capitalism is like,
Yep.
It's even harder to get another job than to get the job you don't like.
Hate's a strong, we don't need to go into it. Anyways, so then we get like the show did this next scene word for word. So I don't have anything new to say.
Yeah. And this chapter really is the thing that I was talking about of like, when I think back to the first book and some of the most important things, it's all the stuff in this chapter, the interview and meeting George for the first time at the door and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And just the immediate dynamics that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Like their first conversation is pretty much how their relationship goes on throughout this book.
Yeah. So the whole book is like from Lucy's POV. We talked about that and it's in the first person. And I think that there's a sense in which Lockwood's looks and George's looks are a reflection of Lucy's feelings about them to some degree. Like you could read these as like, it is an objective fact that like George is sloppy and just like unappealing and hard to be around. And Lockwood is a bright, shining angel of beauty and charisma and handsomeness. But like, I do think there is a little bit of like Lucy's feelings coloring all of those descriptions.
100%. When she says George's face is uniquely punchable.
It's really good.
Like, calm down. That's the meanest thing.
His backside calls out for a kicking or whatever.
Yeah, I think maybe you just don't like him currently.
Right. Yeah, I like how these things evolve too. Her descriptions of them. So I just really appreciate like that her voice is like the entire picture of the world that we're getting is like through the filter of her feelings, and we shouldn't take all of it like too literally.
Yeah. I will say before she hates him, she does describe him a little bit more objectively. And I do enjoy how Stroud describes his hair as a texture that reminded Lucy of a horse's tail, because I've never heard hair described that way, but I picture it exactly.
He is the whole thing's very evocative. It's easy to picture George at the door. Like it's all of this is very easy to picture.
Yeah. I don't know, because they did this whole bit so well in the show that's what I see. So I don't remember. Like I read this first, but I don't remember what I pictured. The show has taken over. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it has.
Yeah, because George is so different.
Yeah.
In his physical appearance to the George in the show. But I think all of that's a pretty good choice anyway, because like I love him. In the show.
I am still sad that they've made him not be fat.
I don't like that either.
But again, they kept some of the fat jokes, and you can't. I don't know.
Which is weird. So
they had to not have him be fat because you can't. Anyways, whatever. Moving on. Yes, Lucy meets Lockwood. Oh, okay. So then when she's talking to Lockwood for the first time here, he mentions like a famous ghost thing that happened up in her town. And Lucy's like, oh yeah, I was very young. So before she was an agent. But like everyone was told to board up their windows or whatever, but she still peeked out. And I just think that's interesting that she's always kind of been drawn to ghosts.
Mm-hmm. And not afraid to like bend the rules and like
Yeah. And I wonder if that's because she has this connection to them that no one else we know of currently has it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that like even then she felt them more than other people.
Yeah, that's the impression that you keep getting. And I like how no one, like everyone is like, oh yeah, you have the talent, but no one finds it too remarkable how strong her talent is. And she doesn't even really realize it. But when you're reading back through these books, you'd be like, oh, it's all kind of here. There's lots of clues that she's just stronger than a lot of other people.
Well, when we were talking about this during our show episodes, I always think about something that you brought up with how, you know, she didn't really feel safe and comfortable until she got to Portland Row. Yeah. And that is when her power sort of really started to grow, and how her power felt nurtured there, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing.
Thesis,
because like their culture is so different than the other agencies. And it's like, yeah, it's the whole thing around the procedure of finding the sources and stuff. And that's a big part of this interview and what makes Lockwood different, because they go through like her history, and that's where all the other interviews stopped. And it's like, oh, you were not able to follow the procedure correctly and you like stepped out of line, then we are not interested in having you. And Lockwood doesn't care about your ability to follow the rules. He cares about like, how strong is your talent? What are you going to bring to the team?
I feel like not following the rules is a plus at Lockwood and Co.
Yeah, it might even be what we're looking for, actually.
I do also like when Lucy is describing what talents she has. She says that she has a bit of touch, capital T, and that she uses it sort of to trigger her listening. And that's interesting to me because we never really meet anyone who has just touch, no listening. And I'm like, well, what does that look like? Like, do you just get mental impressions?
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I wanted to say in real life, but like the term for that is psychometry.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Which is like a whole different thing of like reading the history of objects. It's kind of what she does during the interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she does it by hearing their echoes or whatever. And I would imagine that somebody with touch who doesn't have as good of listening just gets like flashes or images or something. I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if touch can exist without sight or without listening, or...
Yeah, does he get sucked into like a full sensory vision? Yeah. Like,
I want more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get when she's talking about her past, and I just point this out because when she says our arrangement ended abruptly, I can't hear anything other than Ruby giving that line. And then almost immediately when Lockwood says some other time, then that just sounds like Cameron in my head.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Even listening to the audiobook.
Yeah, no, my mind just immediately replaces it.
Yeah.
And then we learn about Robin, who jokingly died.
Poor Robin. Oh, he moved on to another job? Perhaps passed on would be more accurate.
Yep. And then, good tea.
Good tea. Yeah, this is a classic Stroud, like, wow, that's dark, but that's funny moment.
Yep. And then Lucy and Skull meet for the first time.
Yeah, I love this. She taps the glass. It's Skull. That was my note. It's Skull.
Mine is just Skull with an exclamation point. But yeah, same thing. I'm excited to get to the rest of the books for more Skull.
Yeah. I have. When I read the third book, I was like, oh, we're going to talk about Jungian shadows, and we're going to talk about it. Like, I'm
Oh,
excited.
great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I love Jung. He's my favorite.
Yeah.
Jeez. I don't really have any notes. Lucy does the interview. She reads the objects. Oh, I have this one because so I was kind of listening to the audiobook and reading along in the book at the same time. And so I just happened to notice that there's a word change on in my book it's on page 86 where Lucy's talking about the watch and how no one should be touching it. And then she says, in the book, it says, certainly not for a lousy interview. But in the audiobook, it was certainly not for a stupid interview. And I'm like, that's an interesting word choice to change.
I know that when I sent my kids to school, right away in kindergarten, they were like, you don't say stupid ever.
Really?
Yeah. This is a big, this is a bad thing to say for some reason. Like it is like treated as a swear word in children culture now.
I mean, I don't remember the intricacies of language choice from when I was young or like in the single digits, but I feel like stupid was treated as like the swear word we could say, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Or you might even be called stupid by an adult. I can remember that by people in the administration at a school. So like now it's just like a complete off limits word. So I know Stroud in the interview that he did on that podcast, the writing podcast, he talked a lot about like he would write things and even his British editor was like, you can't say that. Like they were constantly toning down his language.
So like he was trying to write real teenagers and then he was like, no, we want parents of teenagers to buy these. So
yeah. I think he said like the opening line was something like, we really cocked up all those early missions or something. And they were like, dude, you can't say that. What are you doing? So
that's funny.
I think that's the better way to write though, is just like really put it out there and say what you want and then try to recover the tone in editing if you have to
yeah,
change
absolutely. Write what you want to write and then add the marketing afterwards.
Yeah. That's funny to notice that little difference. I was like, is she going to bring up cookies again? But
no, I honestly, really I wouldn't have even noticed that if I hadn't been listening and reading along at the same time.
Most of my highlights through this thing are like, there's a joke, there's a joke, there's a joke. Like the moment where Lockwood's like, oh, for a moment there, I thought you were psychic. I am. I mean, in an unusual way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did wonder, maybe you know more about this than me, but I feel like neither of us are going to know this, where they talk about her being from the Cheviot Hills. I think that's how you say that, in North England. And I feel like this should mean something, like it's like loaded with implications in the way of like, if it was a story set in America and they were like, you're from, the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky, that I would understand like, oh, this says something about economics and education. And now you've gone to like Washington, D.C. or something like that. And I don't think that like Stroud should explain it. I like that it's not explained, but it feels like loaded that she's from North England in a way that like, I just don't know what it means.
I have never been to the north of England. Sadly, God, I would love to. I've mostly been down south, spent a lot of time in Southampton, which by the name I would assume is as south as you can get in England. Could be wrong. But from like British period pieces that I've watched quite a bit of, I do sort of feel like the north is poorer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that is, or like it gives that impression, like.
You get that from her talking about her father as like really rough and drinks beer and hits the kids if they get in the way and stuff.
I definitely associate the north of England with coal mining, and I do not know if that is accurate to the geology.
I think that's right. Yeah, which is not like aristocratic work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Unless you own the coal mine. But even then, I feel like London aristocrats probably look down on you.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, so I don't know. they kept bringing it up, and I was like, I think this is supposed to say something to us about Lucy as like a little bit more working class, a little bit more hard scrabble, and this is like a part of her identity.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. As somebody who who really truly does not do voices or accents, and the first audiobook narrator who does the first two books, whose name escapes me, she doesn't really differentiate the accents either. The second audiobook narrator who does 3 to 5, I think she does that a little bit more, but I never really pictured them having different accents because of that, but they absolutely would.
I know that the audiobook narrator for the last 3 books is from North England.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's part of why they hired her. I was just trying to look it up to see. Yeah, in the first book, it's Miranda Grayson who narrates the book. She does lots of narration.
She does a really good job. She just doesn't differentiate the accents at all. And therefore it just sort of never really occurred to me.
And Emily Bevan is the other.
Bevan, yes.
Is the other narrator who, and I think that part of the reason why they settled on her was to do with her accent and stuff. That she was like really felt to them like Lucy.
So then chapter 7, in which Lucy takes a tour of 35 Portland Row and gets to know her coworkers better. I have actually no idea what this chapter art is supposed to be. It's a dude in a top hat who looks like he's hanging from a chain.
Oh, I'm trying to flip there. Oh yeah, what is this? He looks like he's a dead person hanging from a chain.
Oh, it's got to be one of the mummies that they...
Oh yeah, in the basement that they practice on.
Yeah, Joe and Esmeralda or whatever.
Right.
I didn't picture them so dressed up.
This is dark though. It's like looks like a dead body.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a straw anything.
Yeah. But yeah, we get a tour and Lucy moves into her attic room. Oh,
there's a thing here that says like, I really like this detail, and it wasn't so much in the show, although I guess it could be in the future. The living areas, for instance, had all sorts of hidden doors that opened onto weapon racks or swung out to become dartboards or spare beds or giant maps of London festooned with colored pins. And I just like that the house is like full of secrets and like all kinds of like little hidden nooks and stuff.
Yeah, Stroud really made it like a kid's dream house.
Yeah, but it also like speaks to, I don't know, like something about Lockwood himself, that like the house is full of secrets. Lockwood himself is like very mysterious. Yeah. No, I meant the same thing that you did. That like, oh, this is if you're a kid, you're like, this is awesome. But it's also like symbolically resonates.
I wrote down when Lucy's just sort of asking him about the house, he says, well, it belonged to my parents then. It's mine now, and yours, of course, for as long as you work here. And that's just a really nice line, because I think a lot of people would never say that, like that the house is yours, not just you live here too.
Mm-hmm.
And I like how that was worded. It just feels incredibly welcoming, and like, the house is yours. Do what you want. And
you can sleep here as long as you don't displease me. Yeah, which feels like that's how it would have been said at Fitz or Rotwell, but here it's like completely different.
I mean, do what you want, just don't go in that room.
Right.
Which, I mean, that seems like fine for one rule,
Yeah, you can do anything you want in this garden, just don't eat from that apple tree.
Exactly. No wonder she's fascinated.
Yeah.
Yes, the tour continues. We learn about the thinking cloth and like all the stuff that they have in the basement. Like because they keep some of their sources and they have their big case book.
I like that stuff. How George is like organized everything by category and all that stuff. Mm-hmm.
And we're first introduced to the idea of type 3s and that nobody has ever encountered one. We're not sure that they actually exist. George is just super prepared.
Right. I don't know if you listened to that interview with Stroud on the writing podcast thing.
I have not yet. I don't know why I haven't yet. I absolutely should. I'd want to. I don't know.
But people who have listened to it would know the little piece of trivia that the thinking cloth was completely stolen from his daughter. that they were on a walk or something like that, and they were just talking about ideas and things, and his daughter, like little daughter, was saying like there should be a tablecloth and you would write things down on it and little notes to each other, and you could draw pictures. It just basically creates and she named it the thinking cloth, and he was like, well, I'm just gonna take that and put it in my story.
And you're a kid, so you don't get money for it.
Right. Yeah. You get to go to college later.
Yeah, I'm kidding. That's fun. I absolutely should. I do not know why I haven't listened to it yet.
Yeah, I think I just highlighted here a bunch of more jokes. Like I walked in on George doing yoga in the nude. With difficulty, I drove the image from my mind. I just love all the jokes.
I mean, I do think the George ones go a little far, although I guess not yet. But
not yet.
Yeah.
I do think there's an important thing that's happening here with George where so I already said, like Lucy doesn't like George. And so like he's being painted in this very unlikable, unsympathetic way. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of distance between her and George. And I think all of that is intentional for what we're going to get in the next part where that gap closes. And so it's, or it closes not so much for the two of them, but I feel like it closes for us as the audience. Mm. So I think our feelings are being calibrated towards George to like have a lot of distance and maybe even some disgust with him. And then we're going to have a switch next time to feel more close about him or like understand him better. And you can't feel closer to him without having the distance, I guess. So I feel like that's part of the work that's happening here.
Right. And just before she goes into George's uniquely punchable face, oh, slappable. I'm so sorry. It's slappable. She talks about Lockwood for a bit, and putting aside everything else that she says about Lockwood, she does say, here was someone I felt I could follow, someone perhaps to trust. Mm. And I do like that she feels just contrasted with Jacobs is really good. Although, of course, the next line is, but George Cubbins, no, he bothered me.
Right. Yeah, I think that's also one of the things that George is doing here, like, in the mechanics of the storytelling, is that he is a contrast to Lockwood. So we like Lockwood more because we like George less.
Yeah.
And that's also like a really useful way that they're being used. He's not just contrasted with Jacobs, but with George.
Yeah.
I do like how he like pushes Lucy out a little bit before that, where they are talking about, the house and stuff. And she's like, what about your parents? And what about that door? And he's like, I'll show you the kitchen now. Like he just completely avoids the whole thing. He's like, I think George is making dinner. Like, we're not going to talk about that. Like,
yep.
It's just totally off limits.
And then eventually she does talk to George about it. And we learn Lockwood likely has a tragic backstory because everybody's got their tragic backstory.
Yeah.
And then the chapter ends with this really great line where she says, but it already pleased me to think of walking into darkness with Lockwood at my side.
I think this is like, I was sending you messages during the week as I was rereading, and I was like, is this flirting, Caitlin? Is this banter? What is this? I don't know.
I just think it shows that like she immediately trusted him. She was immediately intrigued and wanted to go into danger with him. I mean, going into danger is literally their job.
Yep, true.
And then in chapter 8, Lockwood and Co. solve a type 1 haunting, and Lucy gets more comfortable at Portland Row. The chapter art is spiders. So many spiders.
Yeah, because we get world building around
about the spiders, yeah.
Yeah, animals and ghosts.
Yeah, so we get our first meeting with a client, which will happen a lot over the next 5 books.
Yeah, I like how this guy is presented to us with, there's like an ironic distance that we have to him, because he's not presented in any flattering way. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're supposed to sense that he has a certain amount of prejudice. They specifically say that he's in his early 60s, which means that he is older or like was alive pre-problem. So a lot of his sensibilities are still seem to be like situated in a pre-problem world. Like he doubts his grandchild's ability to sense anything. He doesn't think that it's possible that he has a haunting. but he is somehow like scared, and he's like, I guess I should check it out.
Yeah, he sounds like, oh, I don't even know how to describe. It sounds like you brought your grandfather to a hospital, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, somebody says I have a problem. I don't think I
Right.
have a problem.
I don't like doctors. I don't believe in all this science
Yeah.
stuff. But
And
I
it's so
guess.
interesting because he just doesn't seem to trust his granddaughter at all. And I'm like, dude, but like
The
children are
world you live in.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
interesting.
That's what I like about it, is that, yeah, it's his age and all of this stuff. It just tells us a lot about the adults in the world, I think, and the kind of denial that they live in.
Yeah. $10 says this guy goes by Ghost Touch. Obviously, like, I want him to, you know?
Gets himself in trouble. I don't think we're supposed to like him.
Yeah.
And I really like the way that Lockwood handles him, is able to like ask questions that get the information that he needs, but is
Yes.
never like rude to him, because they need the money. He's a client. It just all feels like, oh yeah, this is how work is. And like the people that you have who deal with the customers have to have this touch. And I just think all of this is really good.
Yeah. And then, yeah, we learn about cats and spiders.
Yeah. I don't know that there's any explanation in the world for that. It's just like a feature that,
Yeah. Spiders like ghosts and cats can sense them.
yeah.
God, all I want is that prop from the show about, like, the flyer about having a cat. I want that so bad. I just want a poster of it on my wall. Not a poster size, though, like smaller.
That was another one of the weird things in the interview that they talked about, how like the mail on the bureau or whatever in 35 Portland Row is said that if you would have opened up the letters, they would be to like, Mr. Lockwood, this is your final notice that you owe us blah, 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 blah money. That it was like all written out. It wasn't just like blank sheets of paper in there, but even though it's never on camera, like that's just how they made it.
Yeah, shows and movies do that sort of thing all the time, like things nobody will ever see. Oh, props people are intense.
Yeah, that's art.
So then they talk about after the dude leaves, they talk about what's going on and what they think is happening. And then eventually George starts saying, it can be a risky business being a listener, blah, blah, blah. Somebody jumped in the Thames. And I'm just like, wow, George. Wow.
He just doesn't have those, this sense of like what's appropriate.
Like,
there's no boundaries.
Just because of who you are, you might kill yourself.
Right.
Just FYI, Lucy.
Good luck with your life.
Yeah. Although, of course, Lucy is like, Marissa Fitz had my kind of talent too, which I think is the first we learn about that. And she didn't jump anywhere. And then they go check it out. George is immediately like, obviously it was the Blitz. And I feel like maybe that's the answer he gives for everything. Because I feel like in London, 50% of the time you'd be right. It was the Blitz.
Yeah, I like this a lot. Although it does feel a little bit out of character for George that he's like kind of jumping to a conclusion.
He does mention that Lockwood didn't give them any time. So
true. Yeah. I think the point here is that like this is, so it's doing two things. So it's doing the thing that you're saying about like the Blitz ghost. That lets us know as readers that like, oh, even this, so the Blitz happened in this world.
World War II was a thing.
Yeah. It tells us how far the alternate history, like where do the divergences happen? It's after World War II.
Nazis exist. That's always great.
Right. Yeah. And that even things from like before the problem are still able to like manifest as part of the whole situation here. But then the other thing that it's doing, the second thing that it's doing is like George jumps to this conclusion, but then Lucy has a better idea. So this like shows us that Lucy is a good detective too.
Yes. And it's nice that we do get this one small job for the team coming together.
Yeah, it's not too intense.
Yeah.
It's not very dangerous. It's mainly to go back over all the rules for us so that they're like really imprinted in us as readers. And to give a little bit of extra lore, like, the spiders and cats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we're going over like it gets colder, here and there and things like that we already covered in the first part.
Yeah, I just have one last note. Did you have anything else?
I had a thing here about you'd think the problem would make people consider their immortal souls, Lockwood said. But for the rich, it has the opposite effect. This is when they're back home. They go out, they dress up, they spend all night dancing in a sealed hotel somewhere, thrilling with horror at the thought of visitors lurking outside. And just like the denial of adult culture and of the rich culture, and just how, like we talked about Death Drive in the show,
Right.
And that's kind of Death Drive, is like the rules all say do this, and then what feels good is breaking those rules and like doing what's stupid, because like that's where pleasure is. So all the rich people get to like party all night while the regular people hide.
My note on that was they sort of changed the wording of it in the show, because in the show, Lockwood says, you'd think they'd be scared, or I don't remember the actual line, but that's what he's implying, that they'd be scared of the ghosts, but actually it just makes them more partyish. But here he says, worried about their immortal souls, as though somehow partying is, Christian moralistically wrong, and Lockwood would care about that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't.
He doesn't. That's not what he's worried about.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like that wording. I liked the change in the show that they made there. It's weird to me that he would phrase it that way.
Yeah.
Especially since
I think you're right.
For a show about dead people and like what happens after you die, for a book series about dead people and what happens after you die, religion comes into it very little, which I think is the correct choice. But so it's just interesting that it does crop up in that moment.
Yeah. He's a little stodgy. It might be an act too, though. You know what I mean? Like he's trying to be.
I'm sure he doesn't like actually think that. Like he's not. Right. He's not worried for his immortal soul, definitely.
Right.
But I don't know. I just don't like it. It's weird to me.
There was something more important that I did take a note of a little bit later. Oh, where they talk about the whole fourth grade thing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that she didn't actually pass her fourth grade. And I think what's important about this is that Lockwood knows a truth about Lucy that she is kind of ashamed of, but then he accepts her anyway. And this is important for them bonding. And it's contrasted by George, who seems to like not accept anything about her, and she doesn't accept anything about him. Like Lockwood accepts Lucy for who she is, even though she lied to him. And even though there's like this thing that she feels like, I'm not a good enough agent or whatever, because I don't have this certification. He's like, you are a good enough agent. Like you're already awesome. So I think all of that's like pretty important.
I like that moment too. My last note is on the last page here when Lockwood, when they're talking about George, and Lockwood says that he dislikes hypocrites, people who say nice things to your face and criticize you behind your back, and he takes pride in being the reverse. So I like that, and I wrote down that this is the most teenage shit. Because he was like, well, I don't want to be like that, but I also don't want to be genuine.
Right. I can't be vulnerable.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't want that. So I'm just going to be an asshole and then say good things about you when you're not around.
Right. Because that makes sense. That is the most teenage thing. Yeah. You're right.
I don't even think of it as like I can't be vulnerable. For me, even as a teenager, being genuine ever to anyone, no.
Yeah. If you're genuine, that's being vulnerable, because then people can reject you and you'd be like, oh, they really rejected me.
No, I guess. Yeah. Oh, maybe I'd like so buried it so far that it didn't. Let's not go to therapy. Anyway. But yeah, no, that one really struck me. Maybe I'm more like George than I want to admit.
Oh, I'm very like everything is an act. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you can reject the act and it'd be like, well, you didn't reject me. Yeah, that's classic. Saying good things behind your back. I feel like that is not what happens in the show, right? Like we see a lot of scenes with Lockwood and George, and Lucy's not there. And George is like, we got to fire her. She is a real problem, and all of this kind of stuff. So they don't really do this in the show.
No, but I think in the show they have that moment where George flips on Lucy, after they go for Italian.
Right. Where he knows her better.
Yeah.
That's such a good observation, though, that it's a teenage persona thing.
It's, yeah, makes me think Stroud was channeling himself a little bit because it just rings so true.
Uh-huh. Oh, like right after that, I had something highlighted because he's talking about how George worked at Fitz and how they valued courtesy, secrecy, and discretion, which is like a joke about George. Like, he's none of these things. But it does just kind of highlight once again how the adult run agencies are all about procedure and how Lucy doesn't fit into that, and how Lockwood and Co. are just all about something different. And like working against that procedure is that's why George is part of the team, because he doesn't do that.
Right. Yeah.
Why Lucy is here is because she couldn't get a job at those places. So like it's funny, but it's also like actually important. And then the very last line in this whole chapter is also like funny and ironic, because this is like, Lockwood laughed, "There's no hope about it. With our combined talents, what could possibly go wrong? And like, remember how the house is on fire and we had to jump out and like,
yes,
and the ghost was attacking us." So there's like a lot of irony on that line.
That feels like a trope, you know, like you've read that sort of thing a million times. Somebody goes, "What could go wrong?" Everything can go wrong. But
the funny thing is, it's already gone wrong.
That's true.
Because this is the past, and so and that's like the perfect transition to go back.
Yeah.
Which we will do next time when we read The Necklace, Part 3. I did want to talk a little bit. Last time I talked about like the lore of silver and iron and stuff, and I wanted to do that again, to talk about salt a little bit and like why that would be a thing at all, because there is lore around salt. And like, I think we all know, you know, with the amount of sodium in our diets as modern people, that like salt helps things to not rot. And that's why it's a preservative in all of our food. And
I mean, it also just tastes real good.
It does taste good. I love salt. You can imagine like the first person who like licked that rock and they were like, "Whoa, this is the best."
I think about shit like this all the time, because this is so wildly off topic. But like, who was the first person who took an egg and then like took the yellow bit out and then was like, "Wait, a meringue.
This is
how
cool.
do you figure that out?"
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. I know. Anyways, think about that all the time too.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So they would have noticed the same way that I talked about with silver, that you keep the water in silver and it doesn't go rancid, that when you have salt on food and stuff, it doesn't rot. And you would associate like disease and rot with, you know, supernatural bad forces. And so this was kind of an anti-supernatural bad forces kind of material. And so it just gets supernatural qualities ascribed to it because it helps you to stay healthy and not sick. So it's kind of like a universal thing in human culture all over the world, with societies that didn't communicate with each other. We were like, yeah, salt is anti-ghost shit. That we just all believe that.
Anti-supernatural in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Even good. Yeah, that's true. Even like good ghosts and stuff, they don't like it. And then lavender has like kind of a similar thing. Again, it's like, it's a natural insect repellent, and you can use like lavender on, you know, like irritated skin, and it has a good medical effect. And so like anything that keeps you healthy, that keeps away, it has a good smell to it. And there was like a whole theory for a while, especially in Europe, of miasma. So like bad smells make you sick, good smells keep you healthy. And so lavender like has like a lot of associations with good health, and therefore like it's anti-death, just again, like supernatural things make you sick. And so this material keeps away the supernatural bad guys. So it has a magical aura to it.
I knew some of these things about lavender, but I've never seen it used in fiction this way.
Yeah, me neither.
Or even like in folklore at all, which is interesting because all the other ones kind of were inspired by folklore.
Yeah, I've never seen it either. And you'll usually see like some kind of herbalist character, usually a woman or a witch, who will like use
a woman things. Or a witch.
Well, you know, like sometimes she's not a witch, she's just an herbalist. I don't know.
No, I know what you're saying. Carry on.
Yeah, but I've never seen it like so widespread to like have a plant used this way. I think it's super creative. It's very cool. I love how they use it in the show. Like
Yes.
the little sprigs will show up all the time, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's so smart.
When, yeah, the one that like Penelope Fitz is wearing on her coat at the funeral.
Mm-hmm. It's very prominent. It kind of reminds me in America, like how we have the stupid politicians have the American flag pin, and to be like, I care about ghost culture because I have this thing.
Oh, this felt more to me like same idea, but it felt more to me like how in Britain and Canada, and I have to assume other Commonwealth countries like Australia, New Zealand, that sort of thing. We wear poppies in November for Remembrance Day. It felt exactly like that.
Yep. Yeah, the same kind of thing.
And like as soon as November 1st hits, if you're on the news or if you're like a politician, anywhere ever, you have to have a poppy on or people will judge you.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like performative, right? Yeah. But that it does have an actual material effect on the ghosts in the world. Like it's measurable and real.
And from that, we're going to go into best joke. I don't have a worst joke this week. I only have one good one.
I feel like there's so many.
There were so many. I am going to go with mine because you don't sound ready.
Okay.
I had skipped over it purposely when we were talking about it, but then you brought it up and I was like, but that's fine.
Sorry.
But it's the, I thought you were psychic joke,
It's so good.
How he's like, how Lucy says, I haven't brought you any donuts. And he's like, well, what makes you say that? And then George told me about your daily deliveries. Oh, like for a moment there, I thought you were psychic. And Lucy, like I picture as being 100% deadpan. I am, And then Loco just being like, I mean, never mind. Moving on.
Yeah, I can't believe they didn't do this in the show because it's so good. It's like it's a perfectly calibrated like conversation joke.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
I'm trying to find it. Well, it's like they did this one in the show and they did it perfectly. And it makes me laugh every single time I reread it, even though I know it's coming. It's the whole thing between George and Lucy of where it's like the feisty and all of that stuff.
Right.
But it's specifically when she's like, well, get up out of that chair. And then he's like, it's a deep chair. Maybe I am trying to, I can't remember how he does it. I'm
right.
Really
Yeah.
But it's the whole thing of like, it's a deep chair. It makes me laugh every time. I'm not a coward. You're a coward. It's just very brother, sister. It's exactly my humor. I don't know.
Now that you say that, I feel like describing somebody's face as uniquely slappable is the ultimate sibling insult.
Yeah. They have that energy immediately.
Yeah. I do like that.
There's no jokes here where I was like, oh, that's bad. Don't do that.
Yeah, no,
they're all pretty funny.
Yeah, they're all pretty good. Did you have most punk rock?
I feel like it's exactly from the show.
That was my thinking also.
Yeah. It's even more punk rock really because they were just like, well, you'll just go back to work. And without saying anything to anybody, she just packs up and leaves.
Yeah. And I liked how I should have looked it up. I liked how she phrased it. It was universally expected that after a short rest to get over the incident, oh my God, fuck them, I would happily rejoin him. That wasn't my opinion.
Yeah. I had a different thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Lucy is a badass.
So if you want to reach out to us on Twitter, you can at Lockwood Podcast. If you want to reach out to me in particular, you can at Inferior Caitlin.
And if you want to reach out by sending an email, go to, you just send it to contact@hollowedgroundmedia.com, or you can go to our website and the contact page, hollowedgroundmedia.com/contact.
And remember to always inspire 10-year-olds to have an existential crisis about their place in the cog of the world and capitalism and blah, 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 blah.
That's what I didn't do with my daughters.
Yeah. Have I ever told you that this is so off topic, but I do have a slight speech impediment.
Oh yeah? No, I haven't. I don't know that.
If I point it out, you'll probably be able to notice it. I'm really bad with R's.
Huh.
I can't.
That's just a Canadian thing.
Well, maybe, but I had to go to speech therapy when I was a kid because I was I was full on wabbit, you know? Couldn't do it. I was like 8.
It's like Barbara Walters or something.
Yeah.
No,
so even now, like I can't roll my R's or do anything fancy with an R, and I have trouble with some words like Aurora. I can't. Don't
That's
like it.
That's a hard one anyway, though.
So, you know, some words are just out there to get us.